Hello friends, this is Growl. Just a little under an hour ago, the official 9.1 patch notes have been released, and there were a lot of changes, some that we didn't know about, we didn't expect, lots of stuff related to the game, the raid, a lot of Mythic Plus stuff, so I thought I'd go over that in a separate video, especially because there is also a release schedule of exactly what's going on with Mythic Plus and the keystone and the drops, so I think that'll be important as well. So welcome friends, sit down, grab some popcorn, and enjoy. So first I want to go over the schedule, because a lot of people have asked what exactly is going on with the patch schedule, what's coming out when do I need to do a 15 key, when am I going to get a weekly chest. So let's go over the schedule first right here. The official patch date is June 29th, so that is the next reset after this video. And keep in mind, I'm going to be speaking in US hours because I'm from America, but you know, in EU it would be one day later. So on this day, here's what happens. The beginning of the Covenant becomes available, and also you get a catch-up if you haven't farmed Renown up to 40. So this means if you're farming Renown, unless you're like a world first raider and you care a lot about the very first weeks of Prog, I probably wouldn't do that unless you have nothing better to do, because Renown will be much easier after the patch. The Season 1 rewards will no longer be available, so that's Keystone Masters achievement, the mount, and Raider IO score will not be tracked on this week either. There'll be new stuff in the Maw. Torghast Layer 9 becomes available, so this is where you start earning the Soul Cinders to upgrade your legendaries from rank 5 and rank 6. Keep in mind, only one layer, and you'll just only do this one layer likely, unless you want to do more for whatever reason. Venari also no longer sells the Season 1 sockets and conduit upgrades. So previously you may have heard other video creators or patch speculators talk about crazy stuff about how you should make a Lego now and put sockets in now, because if you upgrade it, it will, you know, you'll be able to get a socket early and other people have to farm it or something like that. This is not true. They've confirmed in this patch notes that new legendaries created will start with sockets. So if you're in a rush to create a Lego for whatever reason, because you heard someone say that, you don't need to do that. So granted, you may need to make a new Lego or something like that for next season, but you don't need to rush and do it now. The Renown cap will also start increasing again. That's it. So notice there are no new Mythic Plus season, no new raid, no new dungeon, right? It's basically, it's almost like a postseason week. It's not even really season 2. July 6th, the next week, is when the season really starts. So this is when you get the new Mythic Plus affix and the new PvP season, and the drops will be assigned accordingly. So the drop levels will go up this week. Keep in mind that very likely what they do is they cap the max item level of items that are dropped. We don't know exactly how they're going to do it or what level, but it's very possible that you cannot get Mythic Plus 15 drops and it may cap at 10 or 6 or whatever, just because they've done that in the past, and they don't want to, basically they don't want to make it so everybody has to farm Mythic Plus this week. God forbid they force everyone to play Mythic Plus. So yes, this is where the drops will start coming. Sanctum of Domination, the raid, will be open on normal and heroic. Now you will not be able to get ahead of the curve in cutting edge. So keep in mind that, let's say you missed out on those achievements, you still actually have the first week of this patch, the post-patch week, to get those achievements. New world bosses spawning. This is when the new mega dungeon opens, and you'll be able to do this. From my understanding, this dungeon has some reasonable loot, like stuff that you'll actually may use for a long time until you get mythic raid gear. So this is definitely going to be worth doing, and obviously it's going to be fun to try it out and stuff anyway. One other thing to consider is that, from my understanding, this dungeon is not coming to Mythic Plus at all in the season. A lot of times what happened is these dungeons are kind of overtuned. Mythic 0 is like quite a bit challenging compared to a normal dungeon, so they just release the Mythic 0 to give people stuff to do, but they don't release it in Mythic Plus, unfortunately. So we're still stuck on 8 dungeons, but I have some copium that they'll add it in the beginning of, or the middle of the season, rather. The Renown cap increases, and it should continue to increase for the rest of the season up to 80. The 4th chapter of the Covenant campaign will unlock, and then that's when you get flying. So keep that in mind, that even if you're going to be lazy with the Covenant campaign, you probably want to get to at least the 4th chapter, because that's when you get flying. And then the layer 10 for Torghast becomes available. So again, you still only have to do 1 round of Torghast, except it'll be layer 10. You'll get more of the new currency, Soul Cinders. Also keep in mind that when you do these higher layers, 10, 9, and 10, you also get Soul Ash, the old currency. So it's not like you're going to have to go back and do old Torghast or whatever. You're going to be getting Soul Ash and Soul Cinders. So as long as you have a little bit of Soul Ash to maybe recraft a Lego on the first week, or make, you know, a new Lego if something else looks cool to you, you shouldn't, you know, you shouldn't need to do anything other than 1 Torghast a week still. Now, this is the 3rd week. Oh yeah, sorry. There is no Great Vault reward. You do not get a 252 item or whatever in your Great Vault in the 2nd week from doing a key in postseason. However, this last week in postseason is probably a week that you want to do a high of key as possible, somewhere in the range of 18 to 19. That's because when the switch happens, it's very likely the keys will be de-leveled a few levels. So if you do an 18 or a 19, you'll probably get a 14 or a 15 on this week. Again, there's no concrete details about this, but just keep that in mind. Then this week, the week of July 13th, the 3rd week of the season, that is when the first time you'll get that big dopamine hit, when you'll wake up and you'll get that new 252 or whatever item out of your weekly chest. On top of that, this is when LFR opens and Mythic opens. And now there's Torghast layer 11. To be honest, I don't know how high it goes. Maybe 12 or 20 or whatever. I don't know. But either way, there's only 1 Torghast layer that opens per week. So you only ever have to do 1 Torghast per week if you're keeping up. Renown cap goes up, the story goes up, and then now this is, you know, the season in full swing. So hopefully you guys get a better idea of what's coming, what's week to week, and to plan out your, you know, like if you took this week off, for example, you're like, oh, 9-1 just hits, it's going to go crazy. There's probably not much to do this week. You know, if you're going to take a week off, it's probably one of these 2 weeks, just because there's a lot more stuff to do here. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now let's go over the patch notes. As a disclaimer, I'm not going to talk very much about PvP stuff here. I'm just not good at PvP, so I don't really have any authority to talk about how the changes will affect the game. I'm mainly just going to be focused on fighting against computer opponents. So there's a new zone, Korthia. I actually haven't really explored this zone. It's just a new area of the Maw. Hopefully it's cool. You know, usually the new areas are kind of cool. I assume you're not going to be able to fly in the Maw. Maw, I feel like, is, for most people, a love it or hate it. And for probably most, hate it. Although I have heard people that like the Maw. Personally, I don't really mind it. You know, to me, a zone is a zone. And it feels kind of cool. And it's, you know, it's got a lot of stuff to do. But that being said, I don't think a whole lot of people care about the new Maw stuff. The new raids coming out, and again, I already went over the release schedule, so we're not going to talk too much about this. I did do some raid testing, nothing in depth, but the bosses seem cool. You know, it's hard to judge on raid testing. A lot of times you don't really get a good sample of the boss, and a lot of times there's like buggy stuff and you don't know what's going on. You know, nowadays mythic boss fights are so complicated that, like, you know, you need a 10-page journal to even understand what the hell's going on. So I think it looks like it's going to be fun. Sylvanas is going to be a very interesting fight. It's like an anime Dragon Ball Z final boss that's like teleporting around. Really interested to see how that plays out. I think that's going to be a really hype fight. Although there's kind of like a weird intermission thing that hopefully it isn't too rough. The dungeons, the new dungeons coming out, we went over this before. Keep in mind that this is Mythic only, so I believe the item level of this dungeon is going to be higher. Mythic 0 of other dungeons, I think, is going to go up to 210, and this dungeon is going to be 226, from my understanding. And there might be, people were talking about some like higher things too, like 233. I don't know exactly, but either way, it'll be stuff that's definitely good to do at the beginning. The first couple weeks, you're going to want to be clearing this dungeon, and then probably once Mythic Plus and the weekly vault and the raids are out, you're never going to go back here again, unless you want an achievement or something. Mythic Plus rating. This is a big one. So they have integrated Raider.io score or rating into the game, and at first I was a little skeptical, but the more I think about it, the more I'm pretty excited for this change. They're essentially adding a rating in game that will display your progress on dungeons, very, very similar to Raider.io score. The big difference for this rating is that it includes tyrannical dungeons. So for example, or rather, I shouldn't quite say that. I should say it includes your best score of the fortified and tyrannical dungeons. So teams will be incentivized to be pushing on tyrannical weeks. The way the system works, if you're not familiar, is it takes your highest score of every dungeon. So let's say you have 150 points that you got from fortified, and you get, let's say 90 points from tyrannical, because tyrannical is real hard and you're lazy, right? So what it does is it takes your highest score, and then also it takes a third of your lowest score. So in this example, you wouldn't just have 150. The previous score with Raider.io, you would have 150 score, right? It would just be your highest run. But because it's taking a third of your tyrannical score, you're getting a total of 180 Mythic Plus rating, or Raider.io, or whatever you want to call it, for that. So that being said, this is going to have a lot of teams pushing on tyrannical weeks. We have lots of tuning coming up to the bosses later, and I'm interested to see what teams come up with tyrannical. I'm not sure if people are going to still be using Raider.io or still be using this. I think everyone is really going to give this a shot and see how it goes. And then, you know, if it feels bad or if it has some weird consequences, maybe people will go back to Raider.io. But I actually have a good feeling about the new Mythic Plus rating. And now another thing to consider about Mythic Plus rating is that the achievements that you get in Mythic Plus are now based off of that rating. So previously, Keystone Master is all-time 15s, right? Well, now it's going to be some arbitrary, you know, number. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but let's say it's like 1,500 points, right? That means you don't necessarily have to have all-time 15s, right? You can have some 16s, maybe 117, and then a bunch of 14s too, because it's just the achievement is based off of your total score. It's going to be a little bit longer if you're a get KSM and then quit Andy and you only want to do the minimum amount of dungeons. It'll be probably longer for you because now you're going to have to do tyrannical, right, to get those little hits of score. However, if you're someone who's working your way up and you're trying to earn KSM, you know, and you're working your way up through the ladder, I think this might actually be easier because you're not going to need every single 15, like especially the harder dungeons. You can do a 16 of another dungeon to make up for not having a 15 of a harder one. So I think it'll be easier for people who are progressing for it and only more time consuming for people who don't want to do it, which... spoiler, I don't really care about people who don't want to do Mythic Plus. So here's flying. We talked about that a little bit. Remember, this is coming with the 4th week of the Covenant campaign. So if you are lazy, you should just make sure you do at least the first 4 weeks. You can fly around. Shadowlands Season 2, there's not a whole lot to say about this. A lot of people are bummed that the mounts are recolors, that there's nothing crazy. But, you know, there it is. So now we have the patch notes. Excuse me, taking a drink. Now we have the patch notes. I'll go over everything. Some of my insights might be better than others, but we'll talk about it. So AMZ reduced to 8 seconds and now fades when it absorbs a certain amount of health. This is mainly geared towards raid. It'll be a little bit annoying. You know, it's definitely a nerf all around just because it's a nerf in duration, but it is mainly catered towards raid and hopefully shouldn't affect PvP or Mythic Plus too much. They buffed the damage of all spells and ability for blood decays. This is definitely needed. Blood decays are hurting right now damage-wise, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Dorky was talking earlier about how, if anything, Blood Decay should be the highest damage tank, just because that's, like, they don't have any sort of group buff, right? They don't have Mystic Touch from Monk, or Chaos Brand from Demon Hunter, or Battle Shout from Warrior, or anywhere close to the damage that Prop Paladin does. And it feels like Blood Decay should be on the higher end of damages just because they don't bring that. And it's kind of annoying that Blood Decay is like the low DPS tank, but it may make it OP in raid, so Makes sense. Small changes with Frost and Unholy, nothing really to talk about. They changed around some Demon Hunter stuff, some buffs across the board, really. I'm not a huge Demon Hunter theory crafter, so I can't tell you exactly how this is going to be, but in general, Demon Hunter is actually like a pretty decent class right now, and I think the main problem with Demon Hunter is that it has to compete with Fire Mage and Boomkin, which is kind of the problem that most classes have right now. So we're hoping that some of the nerfs that those classes get will help bring some of the other DPS into the meta. Now on the Druid. The only really thing that's important for the Druid is they've nerfed Boomy a little bit. They changed the way that Stellar Drift works in that it increases your Starfall damage and allows you to cast while moving, but it gives it a cooldown, so you can't keep it up permanently. From what I've heard, this makes it feel kind of clunky and annoying to use. However, it's, you know, it's still reasonable. Like, Boomkin is not dead. Another thing that they did is they nerfed Boat. They made it so it's not nearly as top heavy with the crit, and it sort of spreads the crit out over the duration. The main reason that this is a nerf is because of Convoke the Spirits, the Night Fae ability. Generally what Boomkins do is they proc their Boat to get a lot of crit, and then immediately just fire off their Convoke and get 16 spells with very, very high crit chance. So overall, like, just playing normally, it's not going to affect your damage, but because so much of Boomkin's damage is coming from Convoke, I think this will be a pretty big nerf to Night Fae Boomy, and we've been seeing Druids play Venthyr across the board now, at least in Mythic Plus. I don't have a full deep understanding of what's better. My understanding is that Night Fae is still kind of good, but it's less oppressive DPS wise than it was. Fix the bug with Iron Fur? No, we wish. The Iron Fur bug's been in the game forever for Guardian Druid. I don't feel like fixing it. They did some damage buffs to survival. I think they're going to need more than that, probably. I don't have a deep understanding of survival, but one of the big problems with survival in Mythic Plus is that you sort of have to like talent and decide whether you do single target or AoE. Like, you can't really cleave very well like you can with a class like Outlaw Rogue or Windwalker. So I think unless survival's doing insane single target, I still don't see it being brought in Mythic Plus. However, this hopefully will make them feel less trolly in raid. No changes to BM or Marksman. However, keep in mind there's some weird legendary bow shenanigans with the last boss that hopefully will bring them up in power level a little bit. Next we have Mage. Mage had a pretty big damage nerf in AoE. Flame Strike reduced by 10%. Flame Patch reduced by 10%. Kindling nerfed by 33%. Infernal Cascade, this is the conduit, was reduced as well. Fire Mage, I think, was just a really big outlier in terms of damage, especially on AoE. And hopefully this change will bring them back into line with some of the other classes. From the playing that I was doing in beta, Fire Mage still seemed pretty dang good, and I would be kind of surprised if we see Fire Mage fall out of the meta. A lot of people are asking about Venthyr Frost or other classes, but Mage just has a really, really good damage profile for Mythic Plus. It just does a ton of damage right away in an important window, which is exactly what you want to be able to nuke down an important mob or just get a lot of damage in with some sort of buff or vulnerability phase. So Mage is still pretty good, I think. And I don't know if I would expect this to fall out of the meta, but at least it is less oppressive, and it, you know, if you decide to play with another class, it essentially when they lower Mage and Boomy, even if Mage and Boomy are still on top, the important thing is that you can overcome that with skill with other classes, right? Like, if you're a better Hunter or whatever, you should be able to do more damage than a bad Mage now, right? That's the hope. It's not necessarily that Mage is nerfed into the ground, but it felt like it sometimes. It doesn't even matter if a Mage is like smashing their head on their keyboard, they're just going to do good damage. Whereas if you played other classes, you really, really had to try to even stay competitive. And the hopes with the nerfs is that not necessarily that it's going to just make the class bad, but more so that the difference in between the classes can be overcome. And speaking of that, we have Mistweaver as well. So they've been doing some damage tuning for healers, specifically Mistweaver and Holy Paladin. Mistweaver is getting a pretty big damage buff. It may be a little bit misleading because their damage is kind of low right now. So just, 10% on all their abilities, 20% on spinning crane kick. It's a big buff percentage wise, but I don't know how much like an actual of a DPS buff that'll be. Hopefully it'll still, again, put them in the running that they can do like close to competitive damage with the other healers now. A slight enveloping mist mana reduction doesn't really matter too much. Revival, they reworked a little bit so it procs gusts of mist. This won't really be that big of a change for Mythic Plus or PvP, but mainly for Raid, because there's 20 targets hit. So if you, let's say you get Weapons of Order and like other procs that give you a bunch of mastery and then use your revival, it actually heals for a truckload now. But with 0 mastery, I think, or like low mastery, I think it'll end up being around the same healing. Not a whole lot going on. There was a lot of bugs going on with Monk on PTR, as usual. So a lot of people won't know. Like, for instance, there was stuff going on with Windwalker, and there was stuff with the Night Fae ability. There was stuff with, yeah, so either way, monks are really up in the air. It was the exact same way in beta for Shadowlands. There were a lot of weird bugs going on with monks all the way up until release, and there's, sort of still that going on now, so it'll be hard to know how monk's doing now until we see him in the battlefield. Blessing of Winter, this is the Night Fae ability, or whatever. All the blessings for Paladin are buffed, I guess. I don't know if anyone's going to play Night Fae Paladin, but it at least makes it a little bit better. They did quite a big change to Holy Paladin. They had a pretty hefty damage nerf, 8% across the board, and then more big hits on their big abilities. Ashen Hollow, Hammer of Wrath, Judgment. They've also nerfed the mana, or increased the mana cost on Crusader Strike. Overall, I think Holy Paladin, a lot of people are worried that Holy Paladin is going to be bad, or the playstyle is going to change because they're trying to make Flash of Light better. Overall, I think Holy Paladin's still going to be good, and especially for Mythic Plus. Honestly, for Mythic Plus and Raid and everything, I think it's still going to be pretty strong. Again, sort of going back to the Mage thing, hopefully it's less oppressive that if you're a Resto Shaman trying to blast, or a Disc Priest, using your PIs well and your Boon Lego, hopefully you should be able to, not just get completely outshined by a Paladin who's like AFK, not even trying on damage, which is sort of how it was now, where, when I switched to Paladin from Shaman or any other class, it actually felt like our team could just go up one level in Keystone because of how much more damage we were doing as a group. And it's like that sort of thing. Even though that Paladin was not my best class and I was better at the other healers I was playing, that should not be the case, right? You should be able to overcome another class, even if it's a little bit better, with skill, or at least that's the hope. Priest, they nerfed Spirit Shell. A lot of people are worried that Disc Priest will be bad in Raid somehow. Disc Priest has always been good in Raid. Disc Priest has been good in Raid ever since I started playing, and I think it'll continue to be good. You may not run, 3 of them, and you may not have Spirit Shell on every boss fight, but chances are you'll go back to the old school Disc Priest with, I don't know, the skills that I don't remember anymore because I didn't play it, but you know what I mean. Holy Priest, they got kind of a raid cooldown where it resets 60 seconds of everyone's major defensive. I kind of feel like in organized guilds and groups, this might actually be pretty dang strong if, like, everyone presses a defensive that's short and then Symbol of Hope, and then you have another one really quick if there's, like, a tough moment. However, for most groups that aren't that coordinated, I feel like you're probably not going to get very much use out of this. So kind of weird. They buffed Holy on the top end, but it requires a lot of coordination to have everyone use their CDs and then get stuff on cooldown. But for a class like Druid that has Bark Skin, right? I mean, giving them 60-second cooldown on Bark Skin is essentially giving them a free Bark Skin, right? So that's really, really good. Like, that's better than Devo Aura or Barrier. So I think this in theory could be good, but you're going to need to play really well to make good use out of it. Shadow Priest, they're making some changes. I'm not a big Shadow Priest theory crafter, but from what I understanding, they're nerfing their single target just a little bit and moving some of their damage out of Devouring Plague into more like their multi-dot rotation, so they're a little better on 2 and 3 targets. Right now, the state of Shadow Priest is like the best single target DPS, and then like doesn't do anything otherwise. And I still think that'll probably be the case. Like, I don't see how a Shadow Priest is going to keep up with a class like Warlock for multi-dotting, or a class like Fire Mage or Hunter for AoE. But hopefully this will make it a little more balanced. However, I think Shadow Priest has to be the highest single target DPS, because that's sort of all it has right now. It doesn't really have any sort of really strong raid buffs, aside from like, you know, whatever that you'd have a Disc Priest bring normally anyway. So I think it's important that they don't lose Shadow Priest's niche, or you just like won't see any of them in raid. Some rogue changes. I heard from the man that sub is going to be the new juice, and that everyone's going to be playing sub in Mythic Plus. You know, he's the rogue expert, not me. You know, check out JPC the man. He knows all about the rogue stuff. But other than that, there's not a whole lot with rogue being changed, other than some buffs to sub, because nobody's been playing sub. Shaman has a interesting change, because they changed Vesper Totem just a little bit, but the important consideration is that the new Kyrian Shaman Lego is really, really good for Mythic Plus. It did receive a nerf healing wise, and actually that's like best case scenario for Shamans, because then it's probably not going to be very good in raid and not super good for healing, but it's doing a ton of damage on PTR right now. And if that goes live, I think we'll see Shamans and Mythic Plus be playing Kyrian, which will be very interesting. I think Kyrian's actually a fine Covenant. Vesper Totem, not my favorite ability, but hey, if it's doing big damn, it's doing big damn. Some Warlock changes. Honestly, Warlock is the class I know the least about. Sorry to let anyone down, but I'm sure there are smarter people to me than talk about how these Warlock changes will affect stuff. Warrior as well. They are buffing arms a little bit. Arms definitely needs it. You know, even Fury is not super popular right now. The thing about Fury is that it actually does pretty good damage. It just brings nothing. So they have to be very careful about buffing Fury, but a well-needed arms damage nerf for sure. So that goes over the balance updates. I didn't talk about the legendaries. If you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the healer changes and more in depth, and the healer legendaries and the healer covenant stuff, be sure to check out my other video that I just released about that. So we went over the covenant stuff a little bit. There's more renown levels. We'll briefly go over these soulbind stuff. Keep in mind that it probably won't change a whole lot, but if if you have a class covenant set that you really like, make sure you look over these, because some of them are impactful. It looks like they buffed Pointed Courage by a lot. Pointed Courage was already pretty strong for classes like Holy Paladin, and I wouldn't be surprised actually if you're playing it with Resto Shaman too. Combat Meditation was nerfed. This was really, really strong. Kind of surprising that this lasted so long. A weird thing is they buffed Brawn. If you don't even know what Brawn is, it's the last soulbind of Kyrian, where it summons like a big robot guy and he hits stuff. Apparently this guy actually claps now, and he's really, really strong, which is, from what I understand, is a problem, because it like knocks mobs around. It has an ability that knocks mobs back, and in Mythic Plus you can pull packs with it. Like if you're in a tight area where you need to make sure you don't pull stuff, Brawn can just like knock a mob into another pack. At least that was happening on beta, so be careful if you're trying out Brawn in Mythic Plus. I don't know really what you can do about it, but when they increase the proc rate of it, it's going to be out more often. Also, it messes with invis pots, I think, too. So just keep that in mind. They buffed the solvent that gives you mastery. This is actually pretty good, because this soulbind was already pretty good, and always giving you 120 mastery means that it'll be useful even in situations when there's nothing to get. Nothing really too important here. Forgeborn Reveries now doesn't activate again. I've never seen this happen, but I guess I'd take their word for it. Burrs is nerfed. Burrs was kind of weird that DPS players would run Burrs as instead of a potency conduit. just because it did so much damage. Feel the Blossoms is actually buffed, which is kind of interesting. Haste up. I don't know how many healers play Dreamweaver, but it's cool to know that they're they're buffing a lot of these passives in the Soulbind tree, which are good. Hopefully they'll make it feel a bit more impactful when you make these choices, especially as a healer. It feels like you have a little bit more choice. With a DPS, you sort of just go down the line and you sim it and pick the one that does the highest, but it's nice, you know, as a healer, it'll be nice to, like, you know, think about and choose between all the different Soulbinds in the situations. Increase the mastery of Soothing Shade. Theatar's already really good, so yeah, nothing changes here. Okay, let's look at higher level. Oh yeah, so also they increase the drop rate of everything. They're also increasing the drop rate of sorry, not the drop rate, the item level. They're increasing the item level of everything. They're also increasing the item level of conduits. Don't worry about leveling up your conduits now or early. You know, you'll get them as you play, just doing dungeons in the raid and stuff. Changing to a new covenant will refill your conduit energy. Oh boy, love to see that. Okay, now onto the dungeon changes. This is probably the last stuff we're going to talk about, but it's also pretty big, so I think it's worth talking about. Mythic and Mythic Plus enemies, auto attack damage reduced by 10%. This is actually pretty noticeable. This is in response to the kiting meta and, you know, people complaining that mobs hit too hard. In my opinion, I don't really like this change, actually. I think, at least from a healer perspective, it's not necessarily that all the mobs do too much damage, but there are specific mobs that just hit unnecessarily hard. And I wish they would have done finer tuning to those mobs instead of just nerfing everything. But I feel like doing a nerf everything is going to make people happier, you know, as opposed to just changing a couple mobs. And also it's, like, you know, easier on their end, obviously. So I understand why they did it. Here's all the tuning stuff. The enemy damage and health is going up because everyone's gear is going up. Just, you know, I'm not a math guy. We'll figure that out later. This is a change that I'm really, really excited about. New dungeon teleports. If you complete a Mythic Plus dungeon level 20 in time, it grants an achievement and a teleport to the dungeon entrance. Which is sweet, right? Super sweet. Nerds like me who's playing Mythic Plus all day is going to have teleports to all the dungeons. It has an 8-hour cooldown, but it resets after completing a dungeon. So basically the way the cooldown works is if you're finishing if you're doing dungeons, you'll just keep getting them back, right? You can just teleport to a dungeon, do the dungeon. You know, once it's done, if you need to go to another dungeon, it'll be reset. However, you can't use them for just, like, teleporting around the world, if you know what I mean. Like, let's say you needed to go do, like, a world quest in the Venthyr area. You can't just use the Halls of Atonement port, or if you do, then there's an 8-hour cooldown on it. So just keep that in mind. We have... just scrolling through this to make sure it's... oh yeah, this is another one. So there's an NPC in Oribos that you can use to get a keystone. So if you've ever neglected an alt for a week and you don't get a keystone out of your weekly chest, you realize that you have to go into a dungeon and finish a dungeon to get a key. Now you no longer have to do that. There's just an NPC that you can talk to that'll give you a key if you don't have a weekly vault. Also, that same NPC now spawns at the end of a dungeon, and he gives you the option to re-roll your key to if it's below or equal to the key that you just did. So for example, let's say you have a 16 Sanguine Depths and you hate that dungeon. You don't want to pug that at all, right? You can go into a 16 of any dungeon, complete it, then talk to this NPC and reset your 16 Sanguine Depths into something else, which I think is a really, really cool change. It'll make it so the pug scene is a lot more, I don't know how to say it, but like right now it's definitely, you can tell when you pug that if you're doing the easy dungeons like Myths or Halls, it's like near impossible to get into those groups because it's just full with people who are high rated, who are getting their weekly keys. But if you're doing like a harder dungeon like a Sanguine or even just like a longer dungeon like you know, DOS or something, no one high level is doing those groups, or very few. And so now, if you have one of the hardest parts about pushing your key up, you know, you always hear, oh, you can't get into groups, push your key up. Well, the problem is when you get a really annoying key that you're not going to be able to pug, or you feel like you can't pug, you're like, what do I do now? And now it's going to be much easier to just reroll your key, which, interesting change. You know, we'll see how it plays out. I have a feeling for more organized groups, it might cause a lot of burnout because there's only 8 dungeons. And now if you, let's say you really need that 26 DOS or like some specific key and you're an organized group, everybody's just going to be re-rolling their key every single time, and you're just going to have tons and tons more attempts at the dungeons you need. So this change, I think, is going to be great for pugs, and I think it's going to be bad actually for coordinated groups. And with the fact that there's 8 dungeons only in the rotation, I actually foresee that I think we're going to see a major burnout from some of the top teams from this change. If we get another long patch like we did from 9.0, I don't foresee people like really going hard on Mythic Plus in a long time. I think people are going to get the keys they need to get and then get out. But we'll see. There's also some changes to the app, but either way, for most everybody, this is an awesome change for pugging for sure. Now let's talk about the affixes. A slight nerf to bolstering. This is a ridiculous, silly nerf to bolstering. Obviously, it'll still be good and it'll make the affix easier, but this affix needs a rework. Necrotic, level 61 enemies apply it on every other auto attack. So this is like lieutenant mobs, so the guys that you can't stun or slow or whatever. The way it works previously is that bosses do every other attack, but regular mobs do every attack. And the idea was, you know, you can't really kite bosses or you know, but you can kite or slow or stun the little mobs. However, the like medium mobs, let's say like the, you know, the champion mobs or whatever that you can't slow, those guys still gave stacks, and also they'd be, you know, you couldn't slow them or anything, so it'd be really hard to reset. So a slight nerf to Necrotic there, but again, that's an affix that sucks. Let's be honest, no one likes Necrotic. Enraged now increases damage by 75%. This is a nice change, reasonable. You know, I wouldn't go out of my way and say that raging is OP, but keep in mind that these are affixes that are very proliferant. They're very common in the Tyrannical weeks, and now that people are going to be playing Tyrannical weeks, there's going to be a lot more pressure on making sure these affixes perform well. You know, like bolstering, Necrotic, raging, no one ever played any of these because they were just on Tyrannical weeks that no one would play. But now that people need Tyrannical IO, they're going to be at least attempting them. There's actually a massive nerf to Storming. Storming now always moves in a predictable direction, moves slower, and when it hits somebody, it goes away. So this is a huge nerf to Storming. In my opinion, Storming felt like a pretty oppressive affix, so I'm glad to see this nerfed. I think Storming is going to be probably a pretty good week now. A pretty good week to push, depending on what the other affixes will be. Also, this... They've given no comments about this, but the patch notes say the weekly affix rotation has been updated. I don't know what this means. I don't know what the new rotation is. We'll just have to wait and see. So now we go with the dungeon nerfs or buffs. Hakar was pretty drastically nerfed. The way Hakar works now is when he's using his shield and has the shield active, he does nothing. So the previous problem with Hakar was that he would put his shield up, the shield would be massive, and then he would just start beating everyone's heads in and recharging his energy, and it would seem like it would take a long time to break the shield, and then as soon as the shield is broken, he would almost be ready to do a new one. And now when he shields, he's just completely AFK. So this boss is going to be much easier. I think towards the end of the fight, it's definitely still going to be hectic with all the adds and the damages, but it's going to be much easier than it was in the previous season. Dealer Zyxa, the periodic damage and the jump damage with the lightning was reduced pretty heavily, and now the vulnerability only increases damage from the lightning. So previously what would happen is you would get comboed, where let's say you had the lightning on you and then it spawns a bomb on you, or let's say you had a bomb on you and then your monkey teammate passed the lightning to you. You would have the arcane vulnerability from the lightning, and you would just be taking so much damage from the bomb and it would nearly one-shot you. Now, hopefully, you should get comboed down a little bit less. I think this boss will also be significantly easier. Keep in mind that there's going to be no pride buff, though, so this boss will, like, both of these bosses are going to be longer fights than you're used to, probably, but easier and less stressful on the healer, at least. Stoneborns were nerfed. Thrash was reworked. Its range is now 60 yards and not 40, and the damage is reduced by 20%. What this means is it's very likely that outranging probably won't be a strategy, and you're just going to have to take it to the face. A lot of people are upset by this change. I actually, as a healer, I like it. I really hate the outrange meta. There's nothing a healer hates more than when he needs to heal somebody and they run out of range. So I actually like this change. Remember that you can still line of sight this Thrash. It's not something that you... Like, it's not just impossible to avoid this damage. You may use line of sight strats if you're a squishy, like, cloth caster, like a mage or a warlock, shadow priest, something like that. The surprising change is that they buffed the wicked bolt damage. Not sure about this one. These mobs are definitely pretty scary as is, but I think these are more targeted nerfs towards halls, because halls is one of the easier dungeons. They've definitely nerfed some of the easier ones, and they're trying to balance them all together, which I think is fair. So as much as I don't want to see Wicked Bolt buffed, I think, you know, if they do target a dungeon for buffs, I think halls is reasonable. Really big nerf here that is good. Ingra's, this is the first boss of Mist. Health reduced by 10%. Droman, the tree, health reduced by 5%. This is going to make up for not having Pride. This boss was like barely killable even with Pride, and you're not going to be able to get many powers because this dungeon is at the start of the instance. So I think this nerf was needed. I'm honestly not even sure if it's going to be enough. Hopefully it is, but we'll have to see how it sort of plays out relative to other keys. The Bowbreaker's health was increased by 15%. I'm not really sure about that. Those are some of the scariest mobs in the dungeon. People already don't pull those. They only pull the two that they have to in front of the boss. So I'm kind of surprised to see those buffed. The Bucking Rampage now triggers its cooldown on spell start, similar to the shield, right, where it's annoying and you don't want to be involved in the, you know, you can't go in unless you stun it, and it just keeps doing it over and over, which is nice. That they changed that. Just a little bit of a quality of life improvement for melee. Spine Moss Staghorn health increased by 30%. These are the slugs at the end of the dungeon that do the healing. So kind of nice that it makes it harder for sure, but those are the easier mobs, all the slugs at the end. And now that you don't have to get 20% pride for Miss, I foresee the strategy that people do in Miss is skip as much as possible in the beginning and then just do all the slugs at the end, which actually that'll be a pretty fun dungeon, to be honest. And nerfing or buffing, sorry, those slugs, I think will, you know, it'll balance it out a little bit, because I think although the first boss in the Bowbreakers will be a bit harder, the fact that you don't have to do those really nasty pulls in the beginning and all you have to do is just pull a bunch of the slugs at the end, I think will make it easier. Amarth, pretty big nerf. Tortured Echoes reduced by 15%. That's the pulsing damage that it does when it takes the ads. And also the health is reduced by 15%. Pretty big nerfs. You know, obviously the health I think is just a slight change to make up for Pride buff, because this boss was already hard with Pride. And the Tortured Echoes I think was a little bit overtuned, and I'm glad to see this. You know, hard to say how this will play out, but it will be better, I hope. Nelthor, the health of the ad that you have to kill downstairs is reduced by 15%, and the boon that you get when you come up is increased by 10 more seconds. And high keys, it felt like this guy wasn't even worth killing. He had so much health, and you had to like blow cooldowns on him to get out of the bottom phase, like as a DPS when you get pulled down. And the strategy that groups use is they just literally suicided. They just died and then got rezzed, because that was better than doing the gauntlet thing. So the hope is that doing the gauntlet thing is actually slightly more worth it now. Overall, both of these two bosses and Ingra, all bosses that needed to be tuned. You know, they were right on the money here. I think I would have... I don't think I would have changed any of the other bosses in these dungeons, so that's good. Globgrog, health reduced by 10%. This is a boss that all high-end groups used Plague Borers for, and all the low-end groups struggled with a lot. This is a boss that tests your ability to CC on the fly and kill ads. And from pugging, this boss is a surprising pug killer. I think if you've pugged a lot of Plague Falls, you probably know what I'm talking about. Maybe in a more organized group, you don't realize that this boss is hard, but I think a 10% nerf is good. It might honestly not be enough, as funny as that is. I think this boss is actually secretly hard, and a lot of people don't realize it. And once Plague Borers and Pride buff go away, it's going to surprise a lot of people. The big change of Plague Borer is that now the Gauntlet has limited spawns. So previously you would use the Gauntlet in coordinated groups, and you would just pull them everywhere and kill everything with them. And that was silly. Obviously, that wasn't really the intention of the dungeon. It was mainly just to use for that gauntlet. But, you know, of course, people are going to innovate and figure that out. So now you only get a few spawns. And ideally, you're probably going to want to use that on the mini-boss and, like, the tentacles or something. So maybe you use, like, one pack on... Or maybe use some of the Plague Borers on, like, one of the harder packs. But other than that, you know, it's going to be sort of like... I guess I don't like comparing to old expansions, but... Yeah, it's going to make this dungeon a lot harder for coordinated groups for sure. My experience playing with pugs is they don't really use these things anyway, so it won't matter too much. And now the other Plague Borers are replaced with Wretched Plague Borers. My understanding is that those don't blow up. So you can't use Plague Borers to blow up mobs anymore, basically only for the Gauntlet, maybe. They nerfed the first boss of Sanguine Depths. Again, they probably nerfed this boss like 5 times so far. Oh, I had this search thing open because I was looking for a specific change. They nerfed the first boss again, the damage by quite a bit. This is a good change. I mean, this boss is really, really hard. This is a boss that you always use Pride for. This is just a strict Pride nerf, if you will. If anything, I would have liked to see maybe a health reduction on this guy too, but we'll wait and see how it goes. Bleeding Manifestations damage reduced by 20%. This is the ad. When the ad spawns and it pulses damage to the whole group, it is now reduced by 20%. So this is a good change. This boss is very hard as well. In my opinion, this boss in Pugs isn't too hard. I would say the first boss is probably the hardest for Pugs. And in a coordinated group, this will definitely feel better. This guy does insane amounts of damage. They nerfed they changed the Sentinel. So previously the Sentinel was a frontal that would hit everybody in front of it. Now it only hits its main target. So in Pugs, this is a buff because tanks never really kited this anyway. Previously, what you could do is get out of the frontal as a tank. You could like soul shape or just run quickly and no one would get hit by it. Now the tank will always get hit by it, but now DPS never will. And this area in Sanguine Depths is particularly tough because of the camera. It's a very narrow hallway. You know, this is the area around the second boss. It's a cool area, like, aesthetically. You know, it's like a jail and there's all these guys. But practically, it feels kind of bad to play. And I like that they nerf this frontal because it's really hard to see sometimes. And if the tank is, like, kiting and there's a lot of scary stuff, a lot of times you just get this frontal run into you and it feels like there's not a lot of counterplay. Explosive Anger damage. This is the curse that the Remnant of Fury puts on you. I don't really like the fact that it's like a mandatory dispel curse. In general, I don't think there should be mandatory dispels in dungeons that aren't magic because, like, you know, let's say you go into a group without a curse dispel, or even worse, you know, you get into a group with one curse dispel and it's the DPS player, and it's like all of a sudden they have to learn all this stuff and like have their party frame set up and dispel quickly. You know, in my opinion, this Explosive Anger is a healer mechanic, and I don't think having it as a curse is a good thing, but nerfing the damage is nice. The Doubt no longer casts Growing Mistrust, so this is the puddle on the ground that it puts down. Any melee player knows about this puddle because it just happens so fast and it does so much damage. So I'm very surprised that they just completely removed it. When we were playing on PTR, we noticed it and we thought it was a bug. I think they probably should have just nerfed it really heavily, you know, maybe made it do like a quarter of the damage or like do no damage and it just slows you or something like that, but it now just doesn't even cast it. So this mob I don't even think has an ability. Like it literally just walks around and smacks the tank for 0 damage. So I don't know what I haven't seen a mob like that in a while, but there we go. The explosive, this is the red swirly from the scribe that it casts. Now you have a little bit more time to get out of it. In my opinion, though, it's very easy to dodge anyway. The only time you get hit by those is if you get chained by the depths warden, and I don't think an extra 0.5 seconds will do much. This is a huge change. Ventinax inspires the shadow whirls, the little balls, will despawn now, so there can only ever be 2 at a time. So this will be very, very easy to dodge now, or rather much easier than it was before. And even if the boss fight lasts a long time, like a tyrannical fight, it'll still be the same difficulty of dodging. It'll always be only 2 orbs at once, which if you haven't seen this on PTR, this is a huge nerf to this boss, whereas before it would get up to like 5 or 6 and it would feel like impossible to dodge. Zira is back. I don't know why they do this. This mechanic is terrible in Pugs. Yeah, I don't know. They should remove this mob again, but whatever. It's basically this. If you don't remember this guy, it was in the very beginning of the game and they removed it. It's a mob that's stealthed, and then randomly during the fight, it'll come out of stealth and stun somebody, and then someone else has to stop the stun. And in Pugs it's like miserable because there's always that hunter or that boomkin that's just out in the corner of the map near nobody who gets stunned, and then no one's paying attention and they have to sit like a full 10-second stun. And yeah, it's I don't know, I don't like this mechanic, but I mean, whatever, you know, it's something that organized groups will get over. It's just frustrating in Pugs. So now they have the Shard of Domination. I won't go into these in depth. Dratnos has an awesome video about the Shards of Domination and how they work, so I'm not going to talk about these specifically. If you want to know exactly how these work, I would encourage you to figure it out specifically for your class, and like, you know, I'm not going to go into depth just because there's too much to talk about here. Another cool change is you can click on the Great Vault icon on the world map and it opens the panel. Before you had to use some weird macro or add-on to do that, but now there'll just be a button for that. Now you get more alternative rewards. Let's say you don't want to take your Great Vault, which will happen a lot because of domination sockets now. You will instead be able to choose not just Stygia, but Anima or Soul Ash or something like that. So they buffed the non-item a little bit. Each shoulder can now be mogged separately. Kind of neat. They nerfed Imperial Ordnance, so you can't run double on use. They nerfed the Battle Masters, the health thing. They nerfed Cardboard Assassin. Cardboard Assassin I don't think will be a thing anymore. I think this is gone. Kind of a small change in the bottom of the notes, but it may have some impact on organized groups. It's PvP changes. I think that's it. I think we got through everything that I wanted to talk about. That was definitely a bit longer, but I kind of anticipated that it would be more. There's a quest that permanently removes the Eye of the Jailer effect, so in case you weren't doing it, in case you wanted to do more Maw, now you can. In my opinion, removing the Eye of the Jailer I think is kind of weird, because if anything, that was like all the Maw had going for it, was that it was like kind of like that fun GTA style thing where like you want to do more, but then you get more like wanted level or whatever, and it becomes harder. So kind of weird that they're taking that out, but it is what it is. Torghast has a new scoring system. I'm sure there are better videos that go into detail here. I'm not going to go into detail this just because this isn't really my forte, but I'm sure this will be fun. There's a bonus floor though, and you may want to be earning this bonus floor because you get rewards here that you may use. I don't remember exactly what it is, but I think it might be like more Stygia and possibly even more Soul Ash and stuff like that. But yeah, that's it. That is every single update. I will leave a link to the patch notes in the description if you want to check these out for yourselves. If you made it all the way to the end, all 3 of you, thanks for watching. I appreciate you guys. Hope you guys are looking forward to the 9.1 patch like I am. I'm glad we finally got some official patch notes that we can look over and digest and think about. So take it easy, friends, and happy keying.